When I was serving time in New York State Prison back in 2014, I witnessed something I'll never forget. There was a violent incident involving a stabbing between a NETA gang member and a blood gang member, and the whole dorm just erupted into violence. This is the story about what I seen. Tune in. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Grow With Me, Sawyer P, where we grow together, not apart. And welcome back, y'all. I appreciate y'all tuning in today. As you can see from the title of this video, we're going to get into a story about when a NETA gang member had beef with a blood and actually ended up attacking him. So we'll get into the details and the nitty-gritty and what happened and all that. But let me just say my quick spiel I say before I start every story. If you like prison story content, things about recovering from addiction or crazy stories while in active addiction, workout motivation, things of that nature, consider giving me a follow. I would really appreciate it. You can like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. It'll let you know when I upload new videos. Trying to get over 1,000 subs, that'd be great. Ultimately, I think we all, anyone that's on YouTube and trying to grow would like to monetize, and that's a mark you have to hit, is 1,000 subscribers and a certain amount of watch time. So if you guys like these type of videos, if you like my content, consider giving me a subscribe, like, share, commenting as well. If you do comment, I will make sure to positively respond, especially if it's in the first few days. I'll definitely respond if it, shortly after uploading the video. Yeah, I'll be sure to do that for you all. As time goes on, sometimes it doesn't send me notifications, if it's an older video. A lot of the time it does, but I will try my best to respond, especially if it's shortly after the video drop. All right, so let's get into the story. So in this story, this is whenever I was in Bear Hill in 2014. At the time, I was serving an 18-month parole violation, which is kind of long for a violation. A lot of people get 90 days, 12 months. Some go to Willard in New York State, which is the prison boot camp program, which last I heard, I think they moved that to Lakeview, and it's at the shock facility now, from my understanding. I'm not sure if they've done that yet, but I know they were talking about doing that at one point. The New York State Department of Corrections, the commissioner and all them that makes the big shots that make those decisions, were wanting to move Willard into Lakeview. So it's all there, Shock and Willard are all at the same location. Okay, so this was when I was in Bear Hill. Bear Hill is a correctional facility, is a medium security prison located in Malone, New York. It's way, way upstate, near the Canadian border. Literally like 5 minutes away is the border there. And, you're kind of getting into that French-Canadian area up that way. A lot of people have those interesting accents. Even a lot of New Yorkers, some of them kind of have a different type of accent, But anyway, so in Bear Hill, as you know, in any prison, there's going to be gangs, in New York State, the main gang, the one that has the most numbers and the most sets, the most active people, is without question Bloods. There's just so many of them. Any facility you go to, there are gonna be Bloods there. So they, for the most part, are doing the most, as far as activity and just stuff that's going on all the time. They're always, shaking and moving, hustling, sometimes violence when it's necessary. And anytime there is violence between two gangs, two different gangs, a lot of the time gangs will try to be diplomatic and talk things out. They don't always want to be violent and go to war with one another. As much as people say prison is violent, there is diplomacy, meaning there is talking and sometimes trying to negotiating or come to some kind of terms or understanding with one another so that issues can be resolved. A lot of violence is over debts, simple things as disrespect, bumping into someone and not saying excuse me or saying something out their mouth disrespectful. I've seen people get hurt over a ramen noodle soup or a honey bun. It's insane, or a few stamps or a cigarette. It's pretty crazy the lengths people will go to because they consider it disrespect, or if a person lets you get over on them once, beat them on a debt or disrespect them in some way, a lot of the time a person will continue to try you and try you and try you. So a lot of people, they have to send a message right away. It's very common. Anytime I had issues, when I first started, I didn't really know how to do time. When I first got locked up, I was very green and naive to how things worked in there. But as I got to understand things more, and some of the older people that have been down for a while that kind of took me under the wing, explained to me, sometimes you got to use your hands, even if you don't like fighting, it is what it is. You got to address things immediately. And if you don't, you're more likely to get preyed upon or have more problems. So in this particular situation, I was in J1. That was the dorm I was in. It's a pretty big facility as far as the lawns and grounds go within the perimeter of the fence. There's a front half of the facility, and then there's a back half, which they call the annex. And I was back in the annex. Like, that's far from the package room, the mess hall, the infirmary. You have to walk a quarter or half a mile just to get to those places. Anytime you want to go to breakfast, lunch, dinner, you have to walk all the way up there. If it's freezing cold out, snow on the ground, ice, don't matter. Got to go. So but one thing about the annex is it was way more loosely run than the front part of the jail. I think the front part of the jail was closer to the administration building, so you had the superintendent, which is like the warden, some of the top security personnel, like the lieutenants and such. They were up in those buildings, and when they did inspections, they were more apt to do them in the front part of the facility, so it was way more strictly ran up front. The annex was like, people were tattooing and, doing dope, smoking K2 in the bathroom, smoking cigs, playing poker, a lot of that, like, they shut that down up front. There was no poker table, if you were doing tattoos, you had to be real on the low about it up front, things like that, it was just way more strictly ran because it was under closer scrutiny by the administrative staff. So when I was back in J1, honestly, that was probably the best dorm I've done time in, as far as it was loose, but it wasn't loose in the sense that it was chaotic, but the CO wasn't on everyone's, ask about every little thing. If your bed isn't made perfectly, they, or your floor isn't buffed and shining perfectly, they weren't on you constantly. They were a little bit more laxed back there. And everyone called it the hood. The annex, they called it the hood. And honestly, I liked it way more in the front than the front. The front, initially, I was a porter, which is like a person that cleans for the mess hall dorm. I didn't work in the mess hall, and there was no money up there. People that worked in the mess hall, a lot of them didn't get money for commissary and packages, so that's why they worked in the mess hall. And I didn't realize that, when I went there, someone was like, you should go to the mess hall dorm, and I, went. But when I went back to J1, there was money, there was all kinds of things going on. So when I was doing time, and this is still relevant today, there was drugs that came in of all types, from weed to K2, which is like synthetic marijuana, Suboxone, sometimes stuff like heroin and coke would come in. Those were more rare and a bit more exclusive and definitely more expensive, but they definitely did come in. One of the main dudes was in my dorm, and it's funny, like, for a while I was messing around and getting high in there, but like once in a while, on the week, I didn't do it all the time, but here and then I might do some Suboxone or something. I tried K2 a time or two, which I hated. It made me feel like I was losing my mind and I was going to have a heart attack, but a lot of people liked it. It seemed like the Hispanic and the white boys mostly liked Suboxone. A lot of the black guys and like the Bloods and stuff, they really liked the K2. They liked the weed high. That was more common for them to be, they didn't like to touch the harder stuff, even though spice is kind of hard in its own way. Nowadays they have something called paper route. They spray that chemical, that K2 chemical, on paper, and they'll send it in legal mail or cards, and the police already know about this. I'm not giving up game or anything. They're already keen to this and know what's going on. But at the time, most of the stuff was still coming in through visiting room, of course. That's where most of the stuff comes. The police know that as well. I'm not giving up game. But most of the stuff that was coming in was still like in flower form. It was almost like a green potpourri that looked kind of sort of like weed, and they'd spray the chemical on it. And for like, it was either a pouch or two of top rolling tobacco, you get a stick. Or, it looked like some people call them spider legs. They take a rolling paper, because you can smoke in New York State Prison. They roll up like, I don't know if anyone that watches this has smoked weed, but like when people roll a joint or a blunt, like the little crumbs you drop in your lap that you just sweep off your lap, on the ground, like that little bit of crumbs in there is worth, about $6, Like, it's literally nothing. It's like a couple hits, literally like 2 or 3 good hits. But I mean, it's enough to, your tolerance is so low in there, it takes you to the moon. So anyways, in this particular story, there was a lot of K2 in the dorm, and it was very common to see it come in. It was always in there. Every day you smelt it. People would smoke it in there. You smelt it all the time. That and cigarettes. Sometimes weed occasionally, but that was, like I said, more rare. In this particular instance, a NETA, dude that went by the nickname of JR, actually liked JR. He was a cool dude. Both these people I was okay with. I wasn't particularly close to either one of them, but they were both pretty all right. With me, I got along with them fine. So in this story, the two people I'm talking about is the first one, like I said, is a NETA, which is a Puerto Rican gang. That's really big in New York City, but is throughout the New York State prison system. And he went by the name of JR. He was probably, at the time, this was in 2014, he was probably about 35, if I had to estimate his age. And the other person went by the name of Trust. And he was blood. He was a pretty big boy. Both these guys were pretty big dudes, but Trust was more built and cut. JR was just kind of bigger bone, bigger body, but you could tell he was strong and could probably handle himself if he needed to in a fight. Trust, man, I'd worked out with him before, and he didn't lift often and consistently, but he was strong as an ox. I seen him deadlift 405 off the ground, no problem, for multiple reps, 405 pounds, really strong dude, probably weighed, I'd say these dudes both weighed probably around 220, both of them. If I had 210 to 220 range, big boys, 6 foot, 6'1"-ish height, close to the same height, close to the same weight. If we're going by weight class, you know what I mean? When you think about fighting, it makes you think of weight classes. But anyways, so this particular day, so a lot of those guys that did the K2, they would fiend for it. Like, a lot of people would fiend for subs. They wouldn't go through withdrawals, like physical withdrawals, like somebody that would take Suboxone or heroin. But it did have its own set of withdrawals, like people would get anxious or probably depressed or whatever, and they just wanted to escape. Getting high was their escape. And at the time, JR, he was getting, he was hustling, he was hustling Suboxone and K2, but he smoked K2 as well. He didn't use the Suboxone. And so, he had it on deck for sale, on and off. Sometimes he'd have good amounts. I think he was getting it from somebody in a different dorm. And, I would imagine this dude is out by now. I don't know his last name anyway, so I'm sure there's lots of people that go by that nickname. Plus, this was years ago. But anyways, so he got large. He got was getting the K2 in at the time, and this particular day, from my understanding, Trust, he didn't really get a lot of money. He was kind of broke. From my understanding, he was a blood, but a lot of the other bloods in the dorm didn't fool with him a lot. I don't know if he was in a different set, or they were considering kicking him out of the whip, or thinking about it, just the way they dealt with him was different than the way they dealt with amongst one another, amongst others, each other, I mean. And, so even though he was in a gang, he seemed to be more on his own, oddly enough. Like I said, I don't know if that was because he was in a different set or what, or they were going to kick him out the whip or whatever, but that was the deal with him. But he was, like I said, he's a big boy, he can handle himself, This particular day, JR, he goes in the dorm just like any other time, or goes into the bathroom. The bathroom, there's stalls. There's urinals and there's stalls. The stalls have walls, and in front of them, it's like a half door. Like, you ever see the old cowboy doors where you can push through them and they swing open like that? It's kind of a door, like a half door like that. It opens up. So if the CO comes in, they can see over the wall. It's a security thing, to make sure no one's dead in there or whatever, or doing anything sexual, things of that nature. So, a lot of people, when they go in there to use the bathroom to go number 2, they would throw a towel up. Or if they were doing other things, I'm not going to say what, but, pleasuring themselves wise, they would throw a towel up to give them a level of privacy so no one could see through. And this particular day, so JR goes in, makes it seem like he's using the bathroom. A lot of people would lower their pants down in case the CO came in to make it look like they're using the bathroom. If they looked under the stall, peeped to see if they seen anyone's feet under the stall. So he's in there, he fires one up, and I'm in the dorm, like I'm kind of, I think I was cleaning my cube. So, I didn't see the initial part when he was smoking in the back. Actually, I passed by. I didn't really know what was going on, but I found out all the details after the fact. But I did see what transpired. So what had happened was JR threw that towel up, and Trust, he must have been fiending. He must have been jonesing, wanting to smoke, and he didn't have no money. A lot of the time he was broke. And he went in there, and JR was smoking, and he pulled the towel. He was like, yo, let me hit that. Like, he kept pestering JR to let him hit it. Like, he was pressing him, you know what I mean? Like, push, like, pull that's so disrespectful and violating, like, to pull the towel while someone's using the bathroom. Like, that's, like, borderline kind of suspect, you know what I mean? But it's also incredibly disrespectful as well. So, Trust did that. And JR, I think, he told him to get out of here or something like that. That's, K2 makes you paranoid. I've tried it a few times in my life. I hate it. I despise it. I don't want anything to do with it. But when I did it, it made me extremely paranoid. My heart would race, and I thought everyone was after me. I thought the police were going to come to get me. I thought the worst of everything was going to happen, People were scheming on me, that's where your mind goes when you're on that stuff for a lot of people, including myself. So I can only imagine what's going through JR's head when he does this. As he's smoking, as the high's hitting him, Trust pulls that back and is pressing, JR's like, yo, get out of here, and at this point he's about done with it. He didn't let him hit it. Trust, whatever, leaves, kind of like whatever, probably disappointed and whatnot, goes back to his cube, lays down. He's reading, And like I said, mind you, I'm cleaning my cube, and cleaning my cube, listen to my radio, I have my radio on. Some people, you can get cassette tapes and listen to music, but I just had a radio at this point in time. Listen to my radio sweeping, and I didn't hear, I wasn't really paying attention to what everybody was doing at the moment. I was kind of minding my own business, doing my own thing. So yeah, I'm minding my business, I'm doing my own thing, cleaning, taking care of what I need to in my cube, so it's, up to standard. And lo and behold, JR, after Trust did this, the high is kicking in, he's tripping. He goes back to his cube. Tons of inmates have weapons. A lot of people have razors. Some people have, bone crushers. Some people are able to steal stuff from some of the trades. And JR somehow had got something that looked, I didn't see it up close, but, I only saw it from like a distance. Almost looked like a screwdriver, like a bone crusher that had been melted into some type of handle. When you glance at it from a distance, it almost looks like a screwdriver, like I said, like a flathead or something. So JR, he goes back to his spot, wherever he hides his stuff, and he gets a hold of his, his bone crusher, this thing that looks like a screwdriver. He's probably, tripping, like paranoid, wondering if someone's Trust is scheming on him, if he's being suspect, looking over the whatever, but more so it was a disrespect thing, because, it wasn't anything suspect. He was trying to smoke, but there's no telling what was going through JR's. You know what I mean? Whenever you're out like that, like there's you don't know what someone's thinking, whenever they're on K2. People lose their mind on that stuff, like literally lose their mind, flop on the floor, vomit, and roll around in it, and all kinds of crazy stuff. They'll be so crazy and half conscious, puking and seizing and rolling around in their own vomit and stuff. It's crazy. I don't know why anyone would want to smoke that stuff, but anyways, so he goes gets his bone crusher. Trust is laying down. From my understanding, he went to take a nap, and every single, we're in an open dorm setting. It's open dorm. There's a day room, but you got to exit the open dorm into the day room. This is a cookie cutter facility for anybody that's done time in New York. They call a lot of facilities cookie cutters because they're set up the same way, like they have the same contractor build them. A lot of the newer mediums are built with the same layout. There are some old mediums that have been around for, since the early 1900s or the 1800s that are like taller buildings, that almost look more like a mental institution or something like that. Places like Mid-State, Oneida before it closed. There's other ones too. I think Woodburn's built like that. Maybe Fishkill. I think Fishkill, I heard they have keys to their own rooms. I'd never done time there, but that's what I was always told. Anyways, so, all this happened, Trust is in the dorm, laying on his bunk. The cubes are set up with partitions that are about, I don't know, maybe 4 foot high, 3.5 feet high, something like that. So, I'm 5'10" and a half, so they could probably come up to here on me roughly. And, he's laying there and he's facing the wall in his cube. He's facing the wall, laying there, napping, probably having some kind of withdrawal from the K2, and wishing he could smoke, probably bummed out, whatever. And a lot of people get depressed in there, so getting high is the escape, you know what I mean? That's why a lot of people use, because it's just depressing and people don't want to be in there, So, JR, mind you, he's over there he's getting his thing ready, Trust has no clue that JR's like, he just went back to minding his own business and laid it down. And JR, he's ready. He's over scheming himself now, you know, like, oh, I got to do something about this, you know. And JR, he, like I said, he was a cool dude, but he always had that look to him, like, you know, you don't want to play with him type, you know what I mean? Like, he would get violent type if he needed to, you know. And from my understanding, I believe he was doing 5 flat for some kind of violent case, robbery or something. And if I remember correctly, he was doing 5 flat. So he went, he got his thing, and Trust had a corner cube in the dorm we were in, which was in the, you know, where a wall meets, and then he had a corner cube, which is highly sought after. You get a little bit more privacy, and it's just kind of tucked away, and a lot of people like those corner cubes. If I could have got one, I would have loved to have had one. It's quieter, you know, maybe just less foot traffic passing by and whatnot. It's just better, you know. Instead of having you know, being in between two cubes and having a person on each side of you, you just got a wall and one cube, you know, to your left or your right, you know. So, you know, Trust, he sneaks around. Like I said, mind you, I'm not paying attention yet. I'm still doing my thing, clean, whatever, in my cube, listening to music. This all happens within like a 10, 15-minute time frame from him peeping around the curtain in the bathroom and coming back in the dorm, and then Trust coming out after he smokes and getting his thing. You know, this all happened like in a 10 or 15-minute time frame. So Trust gets his thing. Instead of coming, Trust was JR was also in a quarter cube across, but on the opposite side from him. It's funny, or he might have been right next to a corner cube, but he was on the opposite side. So rather than just coming across to the front entrance of Trust cube, you know, JR coming across, he circled around most of the cubes and came from a side approach. And, you know, he was sneaking up on him. He's getting ready to get him. And, you know, he creeps up. You know, he's high out of his mind on the K2, goes up in Trust's dorm. Trust is laying there, takes that thing and just hits him real quick and just scurries out. Boom. And, you know, I don't know, like I said, I didn't see the penetration of the knife go into it. I mean, I seen the blood and where the violence happened after. I don't know if Trust had seen him and put his leg up in defense before JR could attack, but, you know, he ended up stabbing Trust in the leg, you know, pretty deeply. You know, he was leaking. And, you know, JR, he took off out of the cube. He hit him twice, boom. And he starts making his way up. There are aisles in between the cubes. He starts making his way up, you know, quickly. Trust jumps up, kind of hobbling. But, like I said, this is a big dude, he's strong. He was going after JR, like coming for him. Even though JR had a knife, like I said, Trust a big dude. Like, he could probably hurt someone, you know. JR was a big boy too, but Trust, like, he was young and just, like, built like an ox. Really strong kid. Probably 23, 25-ish age. Probably 25 if I had to guess. And starts kind of hobble chasing after JR. And he's like, motherfucker, come here, what's up, nigga, what's up, my nigga, you know, my N-word, you know. And JR, he walks past someone's cube and throws ditches the banger, the bone crusher, just flings it in someone's cube. And the dude's cube he threw it in was this guy, he sold loose cigarettes for like $3 a stamp. And the dude just kicked it out in the middle of the walkway. He didn't want, you know, this thing had blood on it. You know, this is part of a crime scene now. Trust starts chasing after JR, and like the dorm's built kind of like there's like a loop. There's like a middle where you can walk through all the partitions, and there's like a loop around, you know, and Trust is literally chasing him, hobble chasing him, and JR is like running, you know, realizing how serious the situation is now, and Trust starts jumping over the partition, trying to come at him this way, come at him that way. And lo and behold, there was there was a few NETA dudes in the dorm. Like I said, the Bloods, this was during like a program time, so most of the people weren't in the dorm. It was quiet in there. So it was mostly just like porters and people that didn't have programs that was in there. Probably 10 people out of a dorm of, I can't remember how many a dorm held, but it was probably 60-ish men, to a dorm, roughly. I could be wrong on that number, but it's probably right around there. And so, like I said, there's probably, 10, 15 of us in the whole dorm, and the officer that watches the dorm. When this happened, the officer was there's inside where the bunks are, there's a bubble, like a desk where the CO sits. That's where he spends most of his time. He has a logbook. He puts notes in, or if he has to write people up, there's tickets up there, and that's just where he sits. There's a chair and a desk, and like a wall, like a counter. If you talk to him, you kind of gotta go up to the counter and talk to him, and a little entrance to it. The CO was out of the bubble and in the day room, or he wasn't in the bunk area when this happened, and so like I said, Truss is chasing him. He's jumping over the walls trying to get to him. Lo and behold, there's another NETA member. Oh, I wish I could remember this dude's name. Oh, I think he went by P. I think he just went by P. He was a shorter dude, but this dude had heart, man. He was funny as hell. Dude was so funny, but he'd get busy if he needed to, And like I said, they're in a gang, like normally, like I said, the Bloods, there's so many different sets. They don't all stick up for one another and fight together. There's not, full unity among all the Bloods in there. So, and I think most of them, if not all of them, were gone when this occurred. So, P jumps up, and he jumps up in front of Trust. Trust is maybe 10 feet in front of him. And he's like, what's up? And he grabs a chair and he just grabs it out of someone's cube. There's like a little school chair, little school chairs, you slide to a desk in like a high school, every cube has one chair. And he just grabs a random chair out of someone's cube and he flings it at Trust. Trust dodges it, and he reaches over the wall into a random person's cube, grabs a chair as well. And Trust is so strong, dude. When he threw this thing, but P thought quick. Mind you, Trust is kind of like off a distance. So P came to JR's defense, just to make it clear. P came to JR's defense because they're both in the same, gang, And, JR, I think he's trying to just go quiet, back to his cube and lay low because he just stabbed someone. Like he just committed a serious felony assault, with a weapon. And P came to his aid, And like I said, mind you, JR's high out of his mind. He's probably tripping now, that this is going on. And, P, P flings a chair at him. Trust dodges it. Trust reaches over a wall and grabs a chair out of someone's cube, and he flings it back at P, but P thought quick, and there was two cubes to each side of him. He reached to one side to grab the first one to throw, and he reached in the other side to grab the one and used it as like a shield. It was crazy, dude. He thought so clever and quick on his feet. Like, I gotta give him props for it. He used it as a shield. Trust, he grabs it by one hand and just flong, this thing goes boom, hits the chair. P blocks it, just boom. P's he's kind of a small dude. He's shorter. He had a little stock to him. He wasn't huge though, but he had heart, man. Like, the dude had heart. He wasn't scared, And Trust, like, keeping it real, if they fought one-on-one with hands, Trust probably would destroy him. But the fact that, he came and stood up, some people might say it's unfair or whatever, but, they're in a gang, that's what they do. One rides, they're all supposed to ride, And, flings it, blocks it. At this point, the CO comes in. He came in right before, and at this point, I'm watching everything. I take my headphones off, and when P threw that chair, I was kind of behind Trust in my cube. That thing's a huge projectile. Like, and he flung it just in case, he dodged it or it, ricocheted somehow off the top of a partition, I'm kind of like doing this so it doesn't hit me, what I mean? So I'm just watching at this point, like, holy And at this point, the CO came in, pulled the pin, and this was before Trust had thrown the chair. Stop, get on the ground, stop it. And at this point, Truss is like, JR, tell him what you did. Tell him what you threw over there on the floor, talking about the bone crusher. Basically told him, or they call that dry snitching, you know what I mean? He didn't outright snitch, but they call it dry snitching, where you're being loud, so loud that it gets the cops' attention and makes someone hot, you know what I mean? They call that dry snitching. So he was kind of basically dry snitching, and he was like, JR, tell him what you threw over there. Tell him what you did to me, motherfucker. Tell him what you did to me. And, when the CO told him this, as soon as he caught a wind of this, I can't remember at what point the CO came in. I thought it was before Truss threw the chair, but at some point during all this, the chase and stuff, he pulled the pin. And as soon as they pull that pin, any CO that's close by, that's free or can help, is supposed to come help. So if it's like a roving CO or a CO at a checkpoint on the walkway, ones that are in medical that aren't busy, whatever, they all are supposed to come to that spot and help immediately, because it means there's an emergency going on. So when he pulled the pin, it took no time at all. I mean, it was literally less than a minute, and a CO came in and grabbed, New York State, the COs are so hands-on. Like, if you go to the box, you're probably going to get whooped. A lot of people that go to the box, they end up getting their ass beat on the way there or when they're there. It's just like a tradition in New York State. If you go to the whole, administrative segregation, you're getting your ass kicked a lot of the time in most facilities. It doesn't always happen, but it happens a lot. And, CO comes in and grabs hold of Truss and just flings him on, slams him on the floor. JR's over in the corner, they're P, like, at this point, he starts to spin off, but the CO's like, him too, and another CO comes in, they start filing in, like, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. Before you know it, the dorm's full of COs. Like I said, most of the other inmates are out of the dorm because of programs, so like I said, there's probably 10 or 15 of us at most in there at the time. And, he's on the ground, motherfucker, bleeding out his leg, all over the floor. You see it. JR, motherfucker, tell him what you did. Tell him what's up. He's got his hands behind his back on the floor, talking. Tell him what you did. Tell him what you did. And, they grab P. One of the COs goes over and grabs JR. They're not as physical because they're not being as reactive as Truss was. And Truss was the one closest to the door when the COs came in. So they grabbed him first. And he's just a big boy, so why not take down, the closest and biggest threat, you know what I mean? So they got him, they grabbed P, P and JR didn't resist, and they all got taken to the hole. And, it was crazy. It was crazy, shortly after this, another dorm, a Blood and a Hispanic gang, NETA, the Ñetas as well, and a different dorm had a huge fight over the TV of all things in the day room. The Bloods wanted to watch the NBA Finals or the playoffs. It was the playoffs or the finals was going on, and the Hispanic gang already had soccer on, and they just tried to come in and take the TV from them and said do something about it. So that gang erupted. Every single one from each set went against each, they just went off in that dorm. But I think this created some tension amongst the Bloods and the NETAs in the prison, and that other incident happened shortly after. It was in the news. This was in 2014. Probably still an article online about it, but in Bear, like I said, this was in Bear Hill. I knew there was an article. I looked it up when I got out. There was an article about it, but a lot of people got hurt, bad. One dude's hand got shattered. Maybe I'll tell a story about that at some other time, but this did create some tension that went further after this happened. They were all taken out. I'm sure that JR probably caught an assault. I never seen or heard from him again after that. They probably all went to a max prison. Their classification probably went from medium to max at this point. But it was crazy, It was crazy. Truss could have lost his life, all over some K2, over some fake spice weed. And being disrespectful and peeking behind the curtain. He had no business doing that, and got him in a terrible situation. So, if there's a takeaway from this video, God forbid you ever have to do time, but respect is one of the most, if not the most important thing in prison. Be respectful. If you accidentally bump into somebody, say sorry, excuse me. You don't have to be a pushover or a punk, but be respectful. It will go a long way. It will go a long way. Stand up for yourself when you need to. Don't let no one push you around, but also be respectful to your fellow man. You all have to live in there together, and carry the way you carry yourself and the way you treat others, with respect. You don't have to be a little friendly, nice guy to everybody, and you don't have to interact with everybody, but when you do, if you do have to, be respectful. It's best to keep a small circle and, keep yourself more in there. The more doors you open, the more prone you are to have problems, the more people you allow in to your circle. So it's best to deal with as few as possible. From my experience, get a few that you're solid with, that you can relate to, that people that do time the way you do time, little workout, partner or something, not a little, but a workout partner or two, a few people you lift with, and keep it at that, have each other's back, so, it's a good way to do your time right there. Stay busy, have a routine. If you have to do time, God forbid, have a routine, and your time will go quicker. Find something to do to pass the time. Draw. Some people do tattoos. Not necessarily encouraging that because you can get in trouble. Some people do hustles like sew for people, or fix electronics, or you can learn a trade, or work out, or get into sports. There's all kinds of things you can do. Get into your faith, religion. There's different church groups and Bible studies and Muslim prayer activities and such. Get involved in something productive. And it keeps you out of a lot of that BS. So the lesson is, don't do drugs. Don't do drugs, of course. And be respectful. Don't violate. Don't peek over a curtain while someone's using the bathroom and pass through them to try to smoke with them. I'm sure Truss learned a big lesson that day. He got stabbed behind that foolish decision. So that is the story of Trust, JR, and P, and a violent incident I'd seen at Bear Hill between the Ñetas and the Bloods back in 2014. So I hope y'all appreciate that story. Like I said, if you guys enjoy these, consider liking, subscribing, sharing with a friend. I'm really grateful for y'all for who watches this. I want to keep being consistent, try to have at least a video or two a week for y'all. Thank y'all so much, and tune in, keep those notifications on for the next one. If you like New York State prison stories, I have some out of Kentucky. I did a little bit of time down there as well, and I currently live in the South in Alabama now. So I will be covering all things prison and recovery, addiction related stuff, all types of stuff. So love y'all, appreciate y'all. I hope y'all have a great day, and continue to grow. Like I said, my channel's called Grow With Me, Sawyer P, where we grow together, not apart. Continue to grow, continue to be better. Don't go to prison. Stay out here. It's not cool. You don't get cool points for it or whatever. Getting tatted up and looking like a tough guy. It's not as cool as people try to make it seem to be in rap songs or on TV or whatever. Be a good person. Stay out of trouble. Get a job or start a business. I myself am a business owner. Be a good, productive human and participate to society in a positive way.